Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of Food School Smarter, Stronger, Leaner podcast on a mission to inspire a world where food makes us better. My name is Shurina. I'm a certified nutritionist, health, weight loss coach, helping people like you guys to change long-term habits around food, around movement, around a lifestyle, to feel, look, and do your absolute best every single day. Guys, today I have a surprise for you. I have a guest in this podcast. We are going to have a conversation with Ashley Reaver, leading nutritionist, who is also, by the way, very passionate about lowering cholesterol, and you certainly do want to follow her on Instagram. That is linked in the show notes if you care about your cholesterol. But anyhow, Ashley Reaver is a leading nutritionist at Insight Tracker. Insight Tracker. Every day there is new diet trend. Eat this, that, avoid those. We cut through the noise by analyzing your blood, your DNA, your lifestyle, nutrition habits, and tell you how to live, look, age, and perform better. So basically, Insight Tracker, they analyze, it's a platform, they analyze your blood, your DNA, whatever else data you have. And they give you practical recommendations. They also analyze your diet habits, your other habits, and they give you recommendations on how to do better in all these areas of life. So Insight Tracker, also link in the show notes if you want to check them out. But without further ado, listen to our fascinating conversation with the leading nutritionist at Insight Tracker, Ashley Reaver. A lot of practical insights that will help you to cut through the noise and do the things with your eating habits, with your nutrition, things that matter, instead of following some bullshit diet. So tune in. Ashley, again, thank you for coming as a guest to Food School Smarter, Stronger, Leaner podcast. Really excited to have you here.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, Ashley, can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself? I got in touch with you because you are on Insight Tracker team. And for those of our listeners who don't know what Insight Tracker is, can you also tell our listeners a little bit what you do, guys, there?
Sure. Yeah. So Insight Tracker is a personalized health analytics company, which is a lot of words, but essentially what that is we do blood analysis primarily in order to identify biomarkers related to performance, longevity, and just general health, and then provide recommendations that you're able to do to improve those markers. In particular, we provide nutrition, lifestyle, supplement, and exercise recommendations. In addition to blood, we also offer DNA analysis and how your DNA may influence your biomarker levels. And we also include tracking of physiological markers. So the data that your watches are always collecting, we do analysis on that, as well as we are really the first platform that integrates all three of those things together.
Okay. Yeah, that's cool. Sorry for a little bit of noise here. Yeah, that's, how I actually first heard about you guys. A few of my clients, and I'm a nutrition coach, right? They came to me and they're like, I did Insight Tracker thing. So here you go. What should I do about it? People still need me, or, people like myself, to give even, more precise recommendation, like what it is the person got to do in their specific life and how to do it the best way. So you are a nutritionist on the team, right?
Yep, I am a registered dietitian on the team. I've been with Insight Tracker for almost 7 years now. Yeah, it's been a very long time. I primarily work on just our science team, although I certainly do help with things like podcasts. Cool. If there's ever an article or something, I do a lot of results reviews for our customers too.
Mm-hmm. And what do you do as a nutritionist? Once you, get the data from people, what's your job?
Sure. So really, Insight Tracker there's a couple of ways that I think nutrition kind of comes into this. on just our science team, kind of going underneath the hood of Insight Tracker, we have a lot of members on our team that are responsible for reviewing literature related to the biomarkers that we measure, or biomarkers being blood, DNA, or physiological measurements, as well as if there are goals that don't necessarily relate to our biomarkers, but definitely have some science-based evidence to support implementing certain changes. So that's really the bulk of what the science team is doing, is constantly reviewing all of the new literature that comes out each week to make sure the recommendations are as up to date as possible. In addition to that, Insight Tracker, one thing that really sets us apart from a type of blood test that you might get from your physician, not only are all of these recommendations that we get from the scientific literature and present to you if they are relevant to you, but our optimized zones are very different also. So if you go to the doctor, you're either normal or something is high or low. What we do at Insight Tracker is we have an optimized zone, which is typically more narrow than what quote unquote normal is. And that's because we don't think that everyone is the same. Therefore, they should not be held to kind of what the same standard of normal is. A healthy, fit 18-year-old should not be considered within the same normal standards as an 85-year-old that is, kind of restricted to just hanging out on the couch. But though the normal zone is exactly the same. So our normal zones are really, how should I say that? They are customized basically based on your age, your gender, your ethnicity, as well as activity level. So depending on your activity level, it would best support your performance if your blood biomarkers were, let's say, higher or lower for some things.
Yeah, that makes sense. As you said, everyone is unique. Everyone is an individual, and what's normal for me, being now in Mexico and being 34-year female, quite active, it's completely different to you for someone who lives, in Canada, and they're 50, and maybe they're male, and maybe they're sedentary.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that all makes sense. And you are a nutritionist, so I'm always, curious about, from your perspective, what can nutrition address the best when it comes to biomarkers? Maybe where it's the most effective, different, blood lipids or blood sugar, or maybe inflammatory markers. Where does nutrition have the best chance to have the most positive effect? Or change biomarkers in a positive way?
I think that's a great point, is because not all biomarkers, despite how much it hurts me to say this, food is not the best thing to do for all biomarkers. Certainly if it's related to metabolism, some of the markers that we test, like your lipids, your blood sugar, your A1C, can have a big influence. 3 of the nutrients that we test, micronutrients, vitamin D, B12, and ferritin, as an indirect measurement of iron. Nutrition, while those are nutrients, nutrition can certainly support, but in some instances, a supplement really might be the best option. Other markers, it might be a combination. So for some of our sex hormones, as well as our stress hormones, if you can identify what might be causing those to be high or low. For cortisol, for example, your cortisol could be high if you're training at a really high amount and you're not eating enough food to support that. Or if perhaps you're intentionally restricting your intake, that can also show for cortisol. But food would only be the appropriate thing to change if that's why your cortisol was high. If you're not sleeping, if you never take a rest day, if you are just very, very stressed and frazzled, those are really the things that you should go towards for lowering your cortisol instead of focusing on food. So food, I would say, is definitely something that you can consider for all of them, but it's important that you also address the reason why that marker is high, and then use food if it could be high for a nutrition reason.
Yeah, because, in our body, everything is connected. And so sometimes food influences other factors. Sometimes other factors influence, the way food is metabolized, and nutrients are either absorbed or not absorbed or metabolized in our body. So yeah, that makes sense. But of course, if somebody, I guess, is deficient in certain nutrients, then nutrition is, the primary tool, whether that through food or supplements.
Sure.
And what also is very often ask questions from my clients and just people on social media, like, how do I know if I'm deficient in X or Z? Do we have good tools to measure all of the deficiencies that a person has, or do we still kind of at the very early stages of learning how to measure all of that in human body, specifically in blood?
So we cannot measure every micronutrient. There's no direct measurement for macronutrients either. There are some nutrients, I would say the three that we test of vitamin D, vitamin B12, and ferritin. Those are three. The blood test is the best way to figure out if you're taking in enough in your diet. And the blood test actually provides the right information, so to speak. It is a good measurement of whether you're taking in enough of those nutrients. Other measurements like calcium, let's say we can do a calcium test, but the relationship of blood calcium in your body is not one that is directly related to the amount of calcium you take in through food. So in your blood, there is a required amount of calcium because calcium is needed for so many things in the body, not to mention muscle contraction, including keeping your heart beating. So if you don't take in enough in your diet, it doesn't mean that your blood levels are going to be low and your body's going to sacrifice not being able to fire the contraction of your heart muscles. That calcium is going to come from your bone to maintain that level. So most of the markers, I would say there is not a blood test where you can very quickly see if you're taking in enough of it. Water-soluble vitamins like vitamin C, for example, yes, you could take a blood test for vitamin C levels. However, since it's a water-soluble vitamin, you don't keep it in your system. There's no store of it for us to be able to test. And that test is very, very sensitive. So if it's not processed in red within a very short time period, it means nothing, essentially. So it definitely is a fine line of figuring out which of those nutrients we can get a really specific, true measurement on whether or not you're taking in enough nutritionally or not.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. And I think that what makes it confusing and difficult for a lot of people. People come, to me or tell me, well, I did this test and the doctor didn't say anything, everything is okay. So why should I care about, I don't know, this supplement or that supplement or whether I'm eating certain foods or not?
Yep. And we do that in the process of Inside Tracker. We also have a pretty extensive questionnaire where we are asking you to tell us, how you eat, sleep, train, and if you supplement with certain things. And we also use that information as things to give you recommendations. So for example, if your calcium level is completely fine, but you've told us that you don't consume dairy or non-dairy milks, which really are the two best sources of calcium, then you would also see a calcium recommendation that says your calcium looks like it's normal, but there's a really good likelihood that you're not taking in enough through your diet to meet your needs.
Yeah, I always also like to tell people there is no magic. If you're not eating calcium, it's not getting into your body.
Right. And just because you're not eating it doesn't mean that your body doesn't need it. Your body just hasn't decided, okay, I'm going to make it without it.
Exactly. But, speaking about normal levels, how do we know at all how much of any nutrient we should consume? Where did we get those numbers?
Yeah, so those are really established by, nutrition science is where that came from. Nutrition is a pretty new field in the sense that it really didn't start till 1910 as a branch almost of chemistry, where they were starting to look at these individual compounds. And vitamins and minerals have been kind of sprinkled in and discovered over the past 100 years or so. And a lot of the vitamins and minerals, the essential nutrients, were really discovered as such because there were populations that, very specific populations that ate similarly, lived in a similar climate, had access to foods from similar soil that were presenting with just really strange medical conditions that couldn't really be explained away. A lot of them, they thought a lot of vitamin deficiencies they originally thought were kind of like contagious diseases because it only impacted individuals that were pretty tight knit, that lived in the same place, ate the same type of foods. And then as nutrition, as essential nutrients started to come out, they started to identify what water soluble vitamins did for in metabolism. They started to identify really what these fat soluble vitamins did in our bodies. Then they started to implement to provide those to some of these communities, and they saw these weird medical conditions kind of disappear. So that's how vitamins and minerals are really discovered. And then for establishing what these normal zones are, this is research that probably couldn't really continue today now that there are such strict research standards in there, but a lot of it was intentionally changing the amounts of certain nutrients that you would provide in a controlled environment. And seeing the types of conditions that you would expect, or how cells can function with less of nutrients than maybe someone would require. So the Institute of Medicine is who really came out with in partnership with the USDA, I believe in the US anyways, a range of amounts of these nutrients that you'd need. The recommended dietary allowance, typically what you see on a food label, of some of those nutrients that they would list. If there's not enough evidence to establish the amount of a nutrient that would meet 97 to 98% of the population's needs, then sometimes they'd set an adequate intake, which just means that as long as you're taking in this much, we don't expect to see any deficiencies. If you can't establish that, they often can establish a UL, an upper limit that just says, don't take in more than this, or else that can start to cause some negative health consequences too.
Yeah. And so here we see, also a wide range in which, people can exist when it comes to their balanced diet. Some people might eat more, some people might eat less, and they'll be totally fine. So that's why it's also, I think, very hard to make like very precise recommendations. Eat like this much.
Yeah. And it is difficult. One thing I often like to say about nutrition is that it is just a very educated estimate. Unless we were to lock everyone inside a box and collected the heat they put out, any moisture that left their body, their skin cells, their hair, their nails that fell on the floor, we'd never be able, and everything else that leaves their body, I should say, we'd never be able to give a very exact, precise amount for nutrients. So our best estimate is really what we can provide for macronutrients as well as micronutrients, just to avoid disease. Yeah.
I think at least for now, that's the situation. Maybe in the future will be much more precise, probably, but not right now. And so what would be your best recommendation for people who are trying to eat more or less balanced diet and trying to get all of their nutrients from food as much as possible? What are some maybe guidelines for foods and food groups that you could, give someone? Let's say they're adults, they're not kids, not people after, 60, let's say. So, and male or female. So what would you recommend, food groups to include so people don't miss out on some key nutrients?
Sure. I would say most importantly to start is that you never want to eliminate an entire macronutrient group. So entirely cutting out protein, carbs, or fat, which is very popular, because you're also going to be eliminating micronutrients that you can also find within that macronutrient. So including all food groups is definitely what my recommendation would be for balance. Trying to eat foods that are variety of colors is important. So getting in a lot of fruits and vegetables from all sorts of different colors of the rainbow is key, because that variety is also going to ensure that you're getting in a variety of nutrients that go with that too. At least in the US, I feel like something that is often overlooked is taking in enough dietary fiber, and in particular, the type of fiber, of soluble fiber, that you mostly get from carbohydrate sources. Chia seeds and flaxseed could contribute some, but that type of fiber that swells in contact with water. Most people in the United States are nowhere close to the recommended amount of fiber, which is 25 grams for women and 38 grams for men. Most people are more than that, are even farther away from that soluble fiber goal. And that plays a really big role in metabolism, in digestion, in weight management. And it's just often something that is, most people, I don't even think know soluble fiber exists, truthfully. And then for protein, I would say, taking in protein from a variety of sources is also ideal. If you're getting protein from a variety of sources, meaning that you're getting it from different types of plants, maybe some animal products, and perhaps some meats, if that's appropriate for you, also is going to be a way that ensures that not only you meet your protein requirements, but that you're also getting in that range of micronutrients that appear in different amounts and that your body can absorb in different amounts from all of those sources.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. Like these days, it's so popular to eliminate a lot of, different foods, like either at paleo or keto or vegan. And whenever, someone comes to me and say like, I want to do this diet, I'm like, always trying to explain that when you eliminate a whole bunch of foods, you basically eliminate a whole bunch of nutrients that now you have to figure out where you're going to get them. Like if you decided to become vegan, where do you get your calcium, for example, right? Yeah. Simple things like that. So yeah, I'm totally with you, like, on that.
And you certainly can get those nutrients, but I feel like people want like a black and white. That's all I have to think about. When in those black and white situations, there's actually a lot more that you need to think about to figure out ways to get those nutrients, like by going around the primary source of them.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like you can't get certain things being, I don't know, on a keto diet or on a vegan diet, but it's definitely harder than when you eat all of the food groups. What I also, you mentioned that there are, primary sources of certain nutrients, and I like to call them, superfoods, meaning that, certain foods are better better at delivering certain nutrients. Like, for example, dairy products, there is a reason why they're advertised as calcium sources, because for most of the people, that's where they can get a lot of calcium, in smaller amounts of foods. So do you have your, I don't know, favorite foods that for certain nutrients that you think a great idea for most people to include, considering like if they are omnivores and they don't exclude, any food groups?
Yeah. I would say my number one superfood is beans.
I love this.
They do not get enough love. Beans are not only very cheap, but they're a good source of protein. They're not a complete protein, so you should not only eat beans, but they do provide a fair amount of protein. They provide carbohydrates, and they are incredibly high in fiber compared to, for most American or for most people in the world, truthfully, heart disease is the number one cause of death. The two nutrients that have a big impact on that are not enough fiber and too much of that saturated fat. So even just choosing a few animal proteins per week that you can swap in for beans drastically reduces your intake of saturated fat and really, really boosts up that soluble fiber intake with just one change. I can't say enough about beans. They are a great way to bulk up any type of meal that will also keep you full for a really long time. As far as other types of foods, I think berries are an excellent food to incorporate, in particular darker berries. So blueberries and blackberries, they're a really rich source of antioxidants. They're a great source of vitamin C, and they're also a really good source of fiber. And then after that, honestly, I think it's a mixture of all sorts of foods. The only foods that I recommend that people avoid are ones that they're allergic to, those that are poisonous, or those that have spoiled. Other than that, there's no reason that everyone should or should not include certain foods.
Yeah. What is your take on though, like processed foods? Because I personally, recommend to try to minimize those. Like, and I specifically talk about foods like that are highly processed with a lot of, sugars, without fiber, either added or natural, or they with a lot of different fats and flavorings and, preservatives.
Yeah. I think if you have the time to make all of your own food and the resources to do so, great. That's definitely where you should lean. But I do think that there's a time and a place for a lot of foods that maybe seem like they lack nutrition for general health, but are actually a really good nutrition option for some situations. And I always bring up Coke. Do we all need to drink Coke? Absolutely not. But if I'm a mile 24 of a marathon, a Coke is probably the best thing that I could drink in order to give me that last bit of sugar to finish up that race, because that's what my muscles want at that time. Definitely a whole foods diet is one that's going to provide you the most nutrients, the most variety of nutrients, and amounts that aren't too much either, I would say. For processed foods, really the thing that gives me the most pause for processed foods is just taking in way too much sodium. 75% of the sodium that we all take in comes from processed foods, meaning foods that are shelf stable, or restaurant foods, because restaurants want you to come back and spend money again. So they're going to put a lot of butter and a lot of salt into their food so that you think it's really good. And we just wouldn't add that much sodium to food if we make it at home. So trying to shift yourself away from relying on those more processed foods that typically are much, much higher in sodium towards foods that are fresher. Not only are you going to have less sodium, but you're going to have more potassium, for example, which is destroyed in the processing of most foods. But if the option is processed foods or starve, processed foods would still get my vote.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. And, processed food, sometimes it has a place, like if you're an athlete and your calorie needs are really high, like it's very hard to get it, from unprocessed foods.
Absolutely.
And, the same,
I think that's something we see a lot with Inside Tracker users that are trying to be just the cleanest eaters, but it's hard to eat 3,500 calories a day of vegetables and quinoa. It's just not going to happen. And so it also depends on what your goal is. If your goal, a short-term goal of performance, it's okay that you prioritize your performance. You can always hop back to prioritizing general health when that performance goal is no longer on the horizon.
Yeah. The only thing, I personally, when I work with athletes, I always tell them, okay, you do need to eat whole foods because they provide a lot of nutrients that you actually need more of. And then on top of that, you can add, other processed foods to kind of like cover the things that you can't really cover like with whole foods. So Ashley, I'm looking through like a list of questions that I have, and I have a couple of interesting questions that I want to ask you. So, nutrient deficiencies. A lot of people are, deficient in some key nutrients these days, and some people think that they might not be, as important. Like, why do I care? I can walk, I can work. I don't really feel any difference. But how those like nutrient deficiencies that we maybe not feel right now, we don't feel right now, how can they, affect our health in the future maybe, and maybe are affecting us right now, but we just don't yet see like the disease state yet?
So if it is a essential nutrient, if it's a vitamin or a mineral, it is, unless it's an ultra trace mineral, it is something that you should be getting from your diet. All vitamins and minerals are essential for something. So, and to be quantified as a vitamin or mineral, it either has to have a specified process that it helps with, a biological function that requires it. If you were to remove it from the diet, you would see that biological function or process stop or drastically decrease. And then once you add that nutrient back in, the process or function resumes. So those are the three criteria in order to be an essential nutrient. We do have stores of some of these nutrients, in particular our fat soluble nutrients. We can store in our fat tissue with the body or in the body. So if you're not taking it in your diet, you might still be utilizing that nutrient. You're just taking it from the stores. And once those stores are depleted, that's when you're going to start to see negative health implications from not having this essential function or essential nutrient that carries out an essential function. Vitamins, water-soluble vitamins are ones that we don't have a store of, but it's pretty difficult to be deficient in a water-soluble vitamin if you eat a variety of foods. There's also a lot of foods that are fortified with them as well. In the US, if you buy almond milk, most almond milks have all of the B vitamins added to it. If you have anything that's made with flours that's been milled in the United States, typically there's been B vitamins added to that as well. And if you just eat a variety of foods, you're going to be able to get in those water-soluble vitamins. For minerals, we also have stores of them typically in the body. But if our utilization or our usage of those minerals is more than we take in particular for iron, that's a really big one for active individuals. You can start to feel that right away. You can, maybe not right away, but you can absolutely feel it once you cross a certain threshold. You're going to start feeling more fatigued. You're not going to be able to, hit those numbers that you're really hoping for from your workout, in particular endurance workouts. And I think this one comes up a lot again, of just because you're choosing not to include it in your diet does not mean that your body doesn't still need it. And I think that a lot for carbohydrates related to athletes. Your muscle can be broken down into amino acids. 2/3 of those amino acids can become glucose. So just because you choose not to refuel your body in the best way possible doesn't mean your body adapts and can do, get by without carbs. It means you're sacrificing another nutrient in your body in order to do that. If you're eating way too much protein and you're not taking in enough carbs, basically that chicken breast is now an expensive piece of white bread. Humans have lasted as long as they have because we are adaptable. We're pretty resilient. And there's also ways that you can turn some nutrients into other nutrients, which is also why if you overconsume proteins or carbohydrates, those can also be stored in the form of fat in your body.
But I guess it's not so much for micronutrients. Like we can't turn most of the micronutrients into other micronutrients.
Nope, definitely not. Macronutrients only. And then, fats are something that cannot become carbohydrates. Only your muscles can do that. And I wish more people kind of knew that as, you're working so hard to build muscle, but if you're not providing your body with the right nutrients, that muscle then becomes a food source basically as well.
And, to be fair, maybe some people are better at making, for example, glucose from fats, when you don't get enough, right? But you never know, like, what's your body going to do once you don't have enough of certain macro or micronutrient. Like, it's hard to.
You can make glucose from a glycerol backbone of triglycerides, but that's kind of it. And it's not going to give you very much energy whatsoever. Other than that, those fats can become ketone bodies, which I also do not recommend you allow to happen and utilize those ketones for fuel unless there is a medical condition that would benefit from you being on the keto diet.
Exactly.
Typically is some sort of a brain condition. But for most people, it is not the case.
Yeah. And, I experimented a lot with keto diet, and I was at a point where it was 3-4 p.m. in the afternoon, and it's like my brain decided to stop working, and it would continue every day till I included carbohydrates back. It's like my body's like, I don't know how to do it. And so that just showed me that not everything I want to do, my body can do.
Yeah. And I also think it's great to experiment on yourself. Don't take somebody else's word for it. Do it and see how you feel, or do it and get some sort of objective testing, like a blood test, to see if that was actually the best decision for you, because we are all different. What impacts my cholesterol might not impact yours. That doesn't mean that my experience is invalid or yours is invalid. It just means that we, require two different things to best support our health.
Yeah, exactly. And, another thing you mentioned is that our body is resilient. Just because you don't experience any negative effects like today, it doesn't mean that's nothing negative is happening or you're not depleting your stores of any nutrient. And that's why, sometimes people on vegan or keto diets are like, oh, I'm feeling so great. And then in a few months, weeks, or, sometimes years, everything just breaks and people are like, where
2 years into a raw vegan diet, your teeth start crumbling. crumbling because there's no calcium in that diet. Don't get to that point. Use the other experiences of people that unfortunately created the literature about why not to do that.
Yeah. And, the more educated I got, the more like understood the stupidity of some of my experience, of my experiments, where I listened to some people who didn't have much education and, raw vegan diet and other diets. And at the end, it all, collapsed, like the whole experience. And because that's just not how our body works. So that's why, science is important, and tracking things, is important to the best of our ability. So we don't just have our experience, and sometimes might be like skewed by different factors, but also have some objective measure of what's actually happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially in today's world when you have so many people firmly in a vegan camp and also so many people firmly in a carnivore camp or somewhere over in that realm. It is important to be able to have objective measurements on your health so that you're not swayed to either end of the pendulum just because one person told you one fact about it. Health really does exist somewhere in between. It does not exist at the extremes. And it's nice to have data that can really support that this is where I am my healthiest.
Yeah. And, maybe data is imperfect, but it's best, you're better with it, with some data than without it.
Right.
That's
and most of us, the only data that we have is our weight, which is the least interesting thing about your health. You can have more weight on your body than you would expect, or maybe than you would prefer, and be very healthy. You can do a lot of unhealthy things to lower that one number and mess up a lot of other data points related to your health. So it's nice to also have more than one measurement related to health that really doesn't tell you the whole story.
Yeah, exactly. There was a couple of questions that I'd like to ask you. One is about supplements. Once you know, for example, that a person is deficient or likely to be deficient in certain nutrient, like, do you have like the supplements that you recommend, maybe certain brands, or do you have any sorts of recommendation that you give to people how to choose better supplements? Because there are so many on the market and they all have great marketing, but like people always like wonder, like, is this better? Is that better? Like, what do you usually recommend?
Well, for Insight Tracker, all of our supplement recommendations come with brands that we recommend. We used Consumer Reports that does third-party testing on supplements that really look at if they actually have inside them what they say, because that's not a requirement, that it's the dosage that they say, and that there aren't any other harmful ingredients that are included in that. There's also a website called labdoor.com that I often recommend to people. It's not as extensive as Consumer Reports in the amounts of supplements that they do this analysis on. But I really do trust them. It's, again, a third-party company that is breaking open those supplements and measuring how much of that active ingredient they actually have, and looking to see what else is included in potentially dangerous amounts within them too. And there's popular supplements that are over the threshold on arsenic that labdoor.com is happy to post and inform people about if they know that that's where they can go to find that information.
Yeah, I haven't actually heard about this one, so I'm going to check it out and I'm going to post it in show notes too.
Yeah.
Because, I'm also, a huge fan of supplementations where, a person or myself might be missing something. So I do believe in them, but it's always, the question is about quality. Like, is it, what it says it is it not?
Yeah, I think a healthy dose of skepticism is also important. I don't think that most people know that the responsibility in the United States, anyways, is not on the government to prove that something is safe. The responsibility is on the company, and the FDA just kind of assumes that the company is, doing what they're saying. But there's no checks or balances, tests to confirm. You can put like kind of whatever you want. You could put like charcoal in a supplement and sell it and say that it, has all of these great health benefits and that it's a multivitamin when really it has none of that stuff in it. And until there's enough complaints, the FDA is not going to investigate it.
Yeah,
so just finding the cheapest on Amazon is not the way to go.
Yeah, definitely, agree with you 100%. Another, I guess maybe a last question for today. What's interesting, fascinating in maybe nutrition field right now that recently happened, or maybe in a few months or years happened that, wasn't there before? Like maybe what are you excited about in nutrition field?
This is a tough one. Honestly, nutrition is not that sexy and exciting. I feel like the intuitive eating side of nutrition is kind of new and taking hold. But as far as like a brand new supplement that we never really knew about before that has a really big impact on health, I'm honestly not that excited about any of those. None of them have been tested. We haven't known about them in a long enough period of time to see if it has an impact on human health. Like the longevity supplements, I feel like are very popular at the moment. Just because something kept a yeast cell alive for double its lifespan does not mean that that has any influence on humans whatsoever. And there hasn't been any research that's shown that it's all of these experiments. They're too new to be able to show that they actually improve health. And that's why I say nutrition is pretty boring, is because a lot of those experiments on the big things that have an influence on health, like making sure that you were done because we saw what happened without enough vitamin D. And that was 100 years ago that really showed us that there is a big influence. Right now, I just feel like there's nothing that's that exciting about it. That doesn't mean that people aren't selling books or, trying to sell the latest and greatest way to eat or this type of supplement. I'm just not super stoked about that much of it, I guess I'll say. I haven't been sold that we have a big new nutrition discovery. There's just not that much that changes of the things that really, really matter as far as nutrition goes.
I agree with you. The only thing I find that has changed over the past few years, especially, is that people's diet became really sometimes like not natural, meaning like people eat products, people eat bars, powders, all kinds of things. And the person can become deficient in so many things just because, there are many products, but a lot of people forget to actually eat real foods, whole foods that have a whole range of nutrients. So
that's definitely true. And, going back to the nutrition basics of eating mostly the things that, we've probably done as humans for a really long time, eating mostly plants, supplementing with some animal products and some animal meat, if it's available, sleeping, exercising, managing your stress, having a sense of community. Like those are all things that are really important for your overall health. Certainly we can start to fine tune those, but if we fine tune it, we might get, an incremental improvement in health, but no amount of supplement is going to add 20 years to your life if you cut out carbohydrates or something like that. There's nothing that can overcome you not nourishing your body with the basics.
Yeah, I agree. And about longevity, today I've been listening to this podcast, Drive Peter and TMD, he's like huge on longevity, very popular. And he said like, right now, we really don't have any biomarkers to measure longevity. Like we just don't know. That's why, it's all a personal experiment and, it might be true, might not be.
Yeah. I think we have biomarkers related to health that can, I should say like medical conditions that can lead to premature death, but we don't have a good marker that's available to everyone that also has interventions and things that you can change that just, give you where you are on your lifespan, so to speak. There's definitely people that are working on those. Telomeres in particular, I think is where a lot of that research is, but there's nothing that's available like that at the moment. And there's also no magical supplement to fix whatever that marker that has yet to be discovered is either.
Yeah. Yeah, not yet, at least. And the last one, gut health. A lot of people, I think, talk about gut health, especially with all the different tests that are available to test your microbiome. Like, what's your take on that? How to influence overall health, what people can do nutrition wise, food wise to improve their gut health, or maybe what to exclude not to screw it up.
Sure. Microbiome is a very new field in science. I think that it's very, undisputable that a lot of your health exists in the health of your gut. But as far as specific strains of bacteria that you'd want in higher amounts or lower amounts, and the interventions that you can increase or decrease those strains, I just don't think that we're anywhere near there yet. We're still accumulating a lot of evidence on that. That being said, though, trying to have a healthy digestion, one that is regular, is definitely a good goal and a good thing that we can all measure as far as a proxy way to assess our gut health. So if you are always having diarrhea or always constipated, again, those are good indications that where your gut health is, something's really off. And mostly it's dietary choices that can have a big influence on that. So that could be taking in enough fiber. Keto individuals have to be so constipated without any fiber in their diet. That is also not a place to hang out. Even if you're losing weight, that is not a good place for your gut to be. Drinking enough water, trying to reduce your stress, getting in some movement. Those are all things that are really important for that. Very, very obvious things, the output of your gut. If those don't look correct, then it's probably a good indicator that your overall gut health is also not that great.
And what would you say about probiotic rich foods like yogurts, kefirs, kimchi, sauerkraut? Do you usually do any recommendations about those or not?
Yeah, we definitely do. There's some biomarkers that have evidence if you are either taking a probiotic supplement with very specific strains that could improve a biomarker. Eating those foods that are high in probiotics generally are pretty good for gut health. And that would always be my recommendation, is to lean into the foods that are high in probiotics as opposed to just taking a supplement. If you do choose a probiotic supplement at Insight Tracker, we will recommend specific brands that have the specific strains of probiotics that can impact whatever biomarker it may have been recommended for. Certainly kind of thinking how humans evolved, we did not always wash our food or eat very sterilized things. So our gut has always been used to having a lot of different things living in it. And kind of the very sterile environment that humans live in now can decrease the amount of diversity that's in the gut, or it could also favor one strain over another. And you want your gut to have as much diversity in it as possible. So those probiotic foods, I think, are great additions that allow us kind of to eat in a way that humans have always eaten without having to eat poop on our food, so to speak.
Yeah. And I think for me, also, I believe, the best way to ensure the diversity in our gut is to eat different variety of foods. The more,
absolutely.
Yeah, the more variety there, the more variety in the gut, because they have to digest that food and extract certain nutrients. So, for me personally, huge, improvement in my gut health. I got it when I started eating beans and lentils again. And the reason why I stopped them is because, Stephen Gundry talks a lot about like lectins and those anti-nutrients. And I'm like, beans are full of them. But then, he never talks about that in a healthy gut. When you cook your beans and lentils the way you're supposed to cook them, it's not a problem. That's why we cook our food in a certain way. And once I started eating it, go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I just wanted to say, my gut health improved and my energy levels and satiety levels, so many things just got better because of that additional fiber and nutrients.
And that's what your gut bacteria eat, is fiber. So just as you feel like crap with you when you don't eat, your gut bacteria are also going to be really sluggish. And of course, no one's recommending that, you eat a cup of dried kidney beans. That is not good for you. And that's, somewhat similar to not just thinking about what foods have in them, but what happens to those foods as you process them, when you're combining those foods with other things. Nutrition is so much more than just looking at one thing at a time. And I often feel like that's why nutrition can get super confusing. No one just eats walnuts for 100% of their calories. So if there's a study that comes out that, if you only eat walnuts, this happens, well, that's not anything that's useful. Or we fed mice a 100% dried bean diet, and this is what we found. But that's not anything that's going to work in humans. So I think it's also important to scrutinize a little bit some of these headlines that are just so popular, and how the media shares nutrition is all about clickbait. We are a people obsessed with the next best thing, or finding this one change that's going to fix everything. And in reality, it's not one thing. It's looking at all of the foods that make up your diet and all of the habits that make up your lifestyle that really impact your health the most.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. It's a whole system, inside our body and also our environment that creates this result that, our health, our fitness, our well-being. And then also, you actually touched upon one other subject that I'm very, curious about and passionate about, is digestion as a process. It's like sometimes we think that in our stomach, there is a bin or burner where we just drop things and they just burn, and it doesn't matter in what sequence, in what amount, what we put together. But, that's not how it happens. The body produces certain enzymes. And if you eat this food with that food, this happens. And if you eat it this with that, then another thing happens.
Yeah. And, the body is ridiculously smart. And if humans required human understanding for how the body works for everything, we would have died a really, really long time ago. If we had to be able to tell our body what to do based on our current beliefs, humans would have been dead a long time ago. There's a reason why people that eat mostly plant-based diets live the longest. If you're looking at the history of the world, those blue zones, as they're called, those are the same things that we should all be striving for, because that's the best evidence we have about what actually influences our overall health. There are some cultures in Mongolia where they can't really grow fruits and vegetables. They eat a mostly carnivore diet. And that works in that environment. Again, humans are super resilient. We can definitely adapt, but it's also important to take in the best evidence that we have, which is really what nutrition recommendations are based around.
Yeah, I, agree 100% that we should, learn from the data that we have. Another thing, though, that I think about is that just because there is no evidence, it doesn't mean that there is none. Meaning, for example, mostly plant-based diet. Well, maybe, that's what was available. There were not a lot of animals. They were hard to kill, hard to get,
Right.
Maybe if you add a little bit more protein, maybe that 100-year-old would live to 120-year-old, who knows? That's why I'm also very cautious about, all these longevity diets. Well, that's the best evidence, but might not be complete yet.
Sure. Yeah. And again, unless we lock everyone into a specific little box and control everything, we won't know. And I think that a lot of if you hear anyone spouting things as gospel about nutrition, that's how you can pretty easily tell that they don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Again, everything is an educated estimate or an educated guess. We don't know absolutely anything for sure, really.
Yeah. That's how I actually unfollow people. If people start saying this is the truth, there is no other truth, I'm like, okay, I'm gone.
Yeah. This is the best evidence that we have. And, that's, as people that make nutrition recommendations, that's what we're going to go on. But ultimately, you're in control of yourself. You get to make those choices for yourself. It's your own risk to take.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Ashley, that's been a pleasure. I learned so much from you, and definitely you gave me quite a few things to think about, evaluate in my own practice. So as a final thought, maybe do you have any recommendations that you'd like to leave our listeners with, to take better care of their health. And then also, Insight Tracker, maybe like if people are interested, where should they go? Where should they look at?
Sure.
What should they do?
Yeah, I would say, I think we did a good job today talking about most of the things I feel about nutrition is just not being too restrictive, including all foods and as much variety of foods as possible is really the best thing that you can do for your health, just because that includes a variety of nutrients. Where people can go to find Insight Tracker, insighttracker.com is the website, but you can also follow Insight Tracker on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. We put a lot of stuff out on Instagram in particular. If you're interested kind of in what Insight Tracker could provide, check out the Instagram page, because there's a lot of recommendations that we go into a lot deeper, as well as sharing kind of specific stories of users on there.
And as I learned, people can provide their own blood tests, right? And DNA tests,
Yep.
and or you can send them kit if, for example, they're somewhere else and they, would like you to analyze their blood.
Yeah. So we can only do a blood test, meaning that we send you to a lab if you're in the US. But we could send you all of the markers that we provide an analysis for if you're outside of the United States and you have a place where you could go get those done. If you already have that blood work, you can always upload those data points onto Insight Tracker, and we will trim exactly the same as if you have blood work from a doctor or from life insurance, you can always upload that, and we will provide you just the same recommendations. If you give us new info, we can give you new info as well.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. And I'm definitely going to link, the resources, Insight Tracker. And do you have your own Instagram account? Maybe people would like to connect with you. What you have to say about nutrition?
So maybe you couldn't tell, but my passion is heart health, and particularly helping people lower their cholesterol. So my Instagram is lower.cholesterol.nutrition. That's where you can find me. And I just got on TikTok, lower.cholesterol. TikTok's a scary place, but there's a lot of videos up there too.
Okay. We're going to link all this in the show notes. So thank you for sharing. And I always, encourage people to go learn, expose themselves to more people, more resources, because the more variety of information also a person gets, usually the better decisions they make in general about their health. So thank you again, Ashley, for being with me today on Food School Podcast. And keep teaching people a better way to take care of their nutrition and lower their cholesterol.
Absolutely. Thank you, Angela.
Thank you, Ashley.